was a pleasure to see you. You and I spoke privately that I think we met back in 2002 or something like this, 2001
I can't
maybe.
remember.
Yes, I know it seems like a different lifetime, but you and I worked together for actually reversing the spread of HIV/AIDS in Haiti at the time for the United Nations, and it's just wonderful that we're still connected and that we're still exploring. And I see all the books in the background behind you. You know, I can tell that you're a man who's constantly inquiring and exploring. How could we lead? How could we live in this time? So it's great to be with you.
My pleasure, Thomas. From Communicate or Die, today we'll be talking about leadership in 100 days. Let's start with the beginning. Let's start with what is leadership. This is a simple question, but there is as many definitions as authors or as anyone can talk about leadership. What is your conceptual framework of leadership?
Yes, let me ask you a question. Is it possible for people to use the chat function?
Yes, they can do that exactly with our live, and they will do that on Facebook as well. And as
that's great.
Yes,
that's
because
great.
You and I, we are on Zoom, and our followers are on live with Facebook. Are you on Instagram? You use Insta?
I use Insta, yes. I'm not on Insta right now, but I use it.
Yeah, because this is something we can do together as well. Sometimes people are more active on Instagram. I can send you a link, not a link. We can be live on Instagram at the same moment as well. This is amazing.
That's great. Because Roosevelt, in a moment, I would like to ask people for some input. So let me just say a few words before we go into this exercise.
Go ahead.
First of all, my heart goes out to all people around the world who are suffering right now. I know there's a lot of suffering from this corona crisis that you've mentioned. You know, people are suffering economically. A lot of people are unemployed. People are uncertain about the future for their business. And some people are, many people are suffering from the health crisis as well. So I just want to say, my heart goes out to all those who need to now reorient themselves. And in that context, I want to thank everybody for being on this call, for making the time. I think Roosevelt is right. There's probably no higher leverage question that we could ask than how could I lead myself? How could I lead my company? How can I lead my life in a powerful way, even in this crisis? And I also want to thank everybody who is not speaking English as a native language. Just in case you're from Haiti right now or dialing in from somewhere other than the United States, thank you for speaking and listening in English. I know I have to translate from Swiss German into English, and then Roosevelt has to listen in English, translate it into French and into Creole.
Yes.
And then back into English, right? So we're all making a major effort here. So thank you for doing that.
But you do the same exactly, because you have to take it from what language again? What is your native language?
My native language is Swiss German.
Swiss German. Wow.
Swiss German, right? It's from Switzerland.
Wow.
I grew up in Basel, and you know, it just says something about the flat world. Thomas Friedman, a few years ago, coined this phrase, which I think is correct even now, that we're living in a flat world. And the corona crisis really shows this, that everybody is affected by it. There's nobody who's not affected. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white or yellow, or you know what nationality you are, what you believe in, your religion, how much money you have. Everybody is affected. And the positive side of this is that everybody can lead. Everybody has what it takes to be a leader. And as Roosevelt mentioned, we will find out in a moment that you can actually use your mouth and your ears to be a leader. So with that, I want to go into this exercise that Roosevelt announced already. Now, do I need to go into Instagram to ask the question, or can we just ask people?
No, you can just ask question. But
Great.
if you can go to Instagram, that will be that. Just go to your Instagram and you will follow me, and you will see Roosevelt live. We are
Excellent.
learning together.
Just give me, so I just go into Instagram and I search for Roosevelt or what?
Yes, Roosevelt GF. How
Okay,
you now? You go to Instagram with your cell phone.
Oh, with my cell phone, not with my
your
computer.
computer. Yes, you go with your cell phone.
That I'm not sure if I have it, but let me just.
Okay, if you have this.
I don't think I can do that.
Okay, no problem.
But let me ask the question, and then maybe people could just give their inputs.
Sure.
Okay. So the question is to write into the chat function a leader that you think is the best leader that you've ever known. Okay. And this leader could be somebody from business, or it could be somebody in government, or it could be somebody in the United Nations, or it could be a religious leader. It could be somebody who's alive today, or it could be somebody who already died from a previous epoch. So what I want you to do is write down at least one leader that you think is really the best leader that you know. It could even be somebody in your family. Okay?
So the question is to write. If you are following us live, we invite you to tell us, who do you think is one of the best leaders that you know? And that person can be a political leader, someone from history, or someone living with you. That might be someone from your family right there. And I am looking to see what result that we have.
Excellent. And even while you're looking, the second question is, who are the worst leaders that you know? Who are the most terrible, disgusting, awful leaders? And again, at least one, okay? If you just write down one name or more, and again, this person could be in government or business or religion or the UN or military leaders, or God forbid, they could even be in your family. Are we getting some inputs here?
Okay.
Ah, I see Lincoln already. Okay, very nice. And are there any other inputs from the...
Let me see, from Facebook, Instagram. Who do we have? Anyway, on our chat here, we have best leader Lincoln, worst Hitler globally, and some people mention worst leader. Let me see, best, they mention Mother Teresa.
Ah, very nice.
Okay. Those are the two that we have so far, while I'm expecting other ones.
Beautiful. Okay, I got it. So, you know, it would be interesting to actually look at why was Lincoln mentioned? Why was Mother Teresa mentioned? What are the criteria that you have for naming those leaders? And I'm just going to make this up here, but I think one of the things about Lincoln is that he included other people in the government that disagreed with him, even his enemies, even people that were working to sabotage him. He said, come into my cabinet. I want to make you defense minister. I want to make you secretary of state, etc. And he was a humble enough leader that he knew that he didn't have all the answers. He didn't know everything. And so he put great people around him. And by the way, there's a great book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, who wrote a book called The Team of Rivals. And I'm now looking at Roosevelt is pulling it out of the library. Look at this. This is fantastic.
That's amazing.
it's an amazing book. It really talks about the humility of Lincoln. He was not one of these huge charismatic people, and yet he was able to win the Civil War. He was able to create great leaders around him. Then, if we talk about Mother Teresa, I would say it's probably the ability to give your life, to sacrifice your life for the greater good for other people, and to be close to the people, to be with the people that are suffering and not on an ivory tower. So I think those are criteria that come to me right away. Roosevelt, did you want to add any other?
I would like to add, sometimes we're looking for leaders where people are on the top. That might be also my dad. My dad started with nothing. We were nine kids, and everybody went and graduated from the university, and
Wow.
with almost nothing. He gave us what he didn't have himself. And I think for me, he's a leader, he's a role model for our family.
That is a beautiful example. And, that is such a great thing. If you can say that about your own father or your parents, that they are role models for you as leaders. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Mm. What about you, Thomas? Who is your best leader?
Great question. Let me see for a second. Let me see. This is a very good question. I would say, and maybe it's just because I'm a big fan, Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was a man who stood in the 19th century. He was growing up while Queen Victoria was still in the Queen of England. He was leading an empire that was covering 25% of the world's landmass. And yet he was able also to be, very flexible and very spontaneous. And, he gave some of the most amazing speeches. He took over when Britain was really being attacked by the Germans. He became prime minister when he was 65, when everybody else thought, everything is lost. Let Winston do the job, because now we're not going to win anyway. And he turned it around. He turned a breakdown into a breakthrough. And I think that's the mark of a great leader. I don't necessarily say that we have to agree with him politically in every way. He made big mistakes as well. But I think that the ability to turn something that is going against you and make it into an opportunity, I think in that he was amazing. And I've read 3 volumes of his biography by William Manchester, the late William Manchester, who wrote a biography called The Last Lion. And it's 3 volumes, and I can only recommend it. It shows also the love letters that he wrote to his wife, where he is absolutely humble and deeply personal. And he says, I will never love anyone as much as I love you, and you have cast a glory on my life, and I am your ever devoted, if ever so fallible, Winston. And I get shivers when I think about this love letter to his wife.
And you write on that, and Winston Churchill, not only he was very active at 65, but also he communicated. He set the English language to war. He used his ability to read every day. He empowered the English people with his messages on British radio. And not only that, he also wrote about literature. He was very versatile. And he was a journalist. He went to India. Then he discovered his finest hour, as you mentioned. And I really appreciate the way you put it, because Winston Churchill is a do guy. We have to do it. When everybody was Chamberlain in Europe, in France was capitulating, he said, no, we have to fight him in the air, in the trenches. We have only one answer,
Yes.
victory. And
Yes.
Churchill is one of character that we need to study as well. And I hope we do that in the future. And I also hope that you follow us today. You do your own digging in the trenches of learning leadership. You go to those 3 tomes of The Last Line and you watch videos as much as you can. And one thing that I appreciate, Thomas, is that we can find leadership in different character traits. We can find leadership, someone like Lincoln, who was very timid. We can find leadership in Mother Teresa, a lady, a nun. We can find leadership is ordinary men like my dad, as I mentioned for me, for
Yes.
myself. And we can find leadership is an outstanding, tough guy like Winston Churchill. Now,
Beautiful.
what is leadership beyond those personalities? How do we define it?
Yes. One more thing about Winston Churchill, and you gave a beautiful summary of his character, and this will also go to answer your question. One of the things that I like about him is every day before going into Parliament, he would actually sit at his pond in Chatswell, and he had made the pond with his own hands. And he would just sit there and look at the ducks and basically contemplate about life and contemplate about, you know, the direction he wanted to take the country in, and the decisions he had to make. And he knew that millions of people depended on those decisions and those strategies. And so I think that what I'm taking from this is the ability to step back from the action. Yes, it's absolutely important to take action. And at the same time, you have to take time out to reflect on what actions you're taking and to go into kind of a self-awareness. And that gets me into answering your question.
But before you answer, also
Yeah,
in
please.
the afternoon, he took a nap in his bathtub, naked.
That's right. That's right.
But
Unfortunately, I've
that
not been
is
able.
something to say that a leader, you cannot be do. You also need to pause, rest, and ponder, and to reflect on things that you need to do. Anyway, let's make the segue to what you want to say.
Exactly. That's a great point. And you know, that's something that I've not been able to emulate yet. I cannot take a nap in the afternoon. I'm working. But maybe when I get older. Let me read you a quote to answer to begin answering the question: what is leadership? And you know, we have to understand that we're living in a world that is very different from the world that Winston Churchill was in, and even Mother Teresa was in. We're now living in a world that I would call VUCA. Maybe you've heard about this acronym, VUCA. It's simply 4 letters that stand for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So in this world, even the way Winston Churchill was leading actually doesn't quite work anymore. For example, Winston Churchill could still drink a lot of alcohol, and you know, he wrote all his speeches on champagne pretty much, which is a great way to write speeches. But today, Winston Churchill will be in YouTube, all over YouTube, with his battle with the bottle, you know. Another example, he called Gandhi, who's another great leader, he called Gandhi that little naked man. I think today you would not get away with that kind of statement. And finally, Winston Churchill gave great speeches, but he was actually not a great listener. So today, I think you also have to be a great listener. So these are just some examples of why we need a new type of leadership in this VUCA world. And I'd like to read a quote on this. The quote is by Kenneth Boulding. And he said, I quote, "The greatest need for leadership is in the dark." It is when the system is changing so rapidly that old prescriptions and old wisdoms can only lead to catastrophe. And leadership is necessary to call people to the very strangeness of the new world being born. And I think we're in one of those times. This corona crisis is, in a way, a more complex crisis than the Second World War. It's definitely a more complex crisis than 9/11. It's at least as complex as the crisis we had in 2008, the economic crisis. And so if we look at what leadership needs, the first thing I think that that needs to happen is, and I'm now going to go, Roosevelt, into this book, which is Leadership in 100 Days. Okay, so it's all in there. Number one, we need self-awareness. We need to be people that are making sense in the midst of so many different informations, data, so much fake news, so much fear, especially in this crisis, so many superstitions, or, you know, people say this, Trump says this, and Putin says something else. And to make sense in this world, which is not a simple world anymore, it's a very, very complex system. So how do we make sense of this? That's, for me, the first thing is self-leadership and self-awareness, that I'm actually able to step back and conduct myself and distinguish between reality and what the media is saying, for example, or what my friends are telling me, or what's on Facebook, etc. That's the first step. Should I go on?
Yes, keep on.
Great. So the way I've done this is basically it's a pyramid.
But before you move on, you mentioned a concept, IVUCA, and I know some of our friends may not have taken the specific notes. Can you go back and tell us exactly about vulnerability, uncertainty, and tell us exactly those concepts, why they are relevant today?
Yes, that's great. Yeah, I was going a little bit fast on this. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Volatility, there is so much changing. You know, what's different from the Second World War, I think, is that every day brings a new challenge. It's what people would call a non-linear challenge, which means you cannot apply simple management that we used to do, where, for example, my late father, you know, he was at the same company for 35 years. It was Sandoz, which is the predecessor of Novartis. And he kind of knew in the beginning of his career, the end of his career, right? So he could kind of in a linear way, he could predict the future, more or less. We cannot do that today anymore. The time is so much more volatile and so much more short term. So that's volatility. Uncertainty is we simply don't know the future. The visibility is very, very low. We don't know who to trust. We don't know whether what we read in the media is actually correct. Who is right? Can we trust our politicians? Can we trust the companies? So that's what I mean by uncertainty. And then complexity is what I said earlier. It's no longer a simple system where simple management applies. It's a complex adaptive system, a non-linear system, sometimes even a chaotic system. And then ambiguity is you don't know, you know, is this way the right way or is that way the right way? When you make decisions, there are so much information, so much more data that are coming in that it's very difficult to make an unambiguous decision. So that's basically.
And in that moment where you are vulnerable, where things are uncertain, where things are ambiguous, and this is that moment you need to to wake up and to see and to have your inner compass, to have that ability to discover under those fake, whatever might be true for someone else, but you need to have your own understanding and your own certainty regarding the situation that you are living now. And that's why leadership matters at that moment.
Exactly. And you just gave a perfect summary of the first level. And I'm going to show a pyramid here. I don't know if this comes through on the
I'm seeing
video.
it. Yes, level 1 is self-awareness. Level 2, relationship. Level 3, vision. Level 4, strategy. And level 5, action.
Exactly. So you just described the fundamental level, and self-awareness is something that somebody mentioned Hitler as an example of a bad leader. I would say that Hitler, this is obviously a simple statement, but Hitler did not have self-awareness. He might have been a great communicator, actually. He was mobilizing millions of people for his vision. He had a vision. Whether it's a good or bad vision is we could discuss. He had a strategy and he took very decisive action, but he was missing the lowest level of self-awareness. I would assert that Hitler didn't know why he was so angry. Why did he want to destroy the Jews? Why did he want to take over the world? Why did he think that Germany was getting a bad deal in Versailles at the end of World War I? So that's an example, an extreme example of self-awareness lacking. And you say rightly, we need that absolutely today. That's the first level, okay?
Okay, so what I get from what you said is level 1 is self-awareness, and one example you had, Thomas, is Hitler. But I can also say he may have been too much aware, too much full of himself. He may have been too much full of himself that he was hungry. Because sometimes that happened to people. We think that I am the one. Our Aryan race is the top one. And we have
Yes.
leaders like Napoleon, we have leaders like Metternich, we have leaders like Otto von Bismarck. They want to build empire like Alexander the Great. This is the pendulum swinging from too much awareness and a lack of awareness. And
yes, absolutely right. And this is a great example because I would like to distinguish between self-confidence and self-awareness. Self-confidence is, I know I'm right. I have the answers. Mission accomplished. We're the greatest in the world. That's not self-awareness. So self-confidence can often be a kind of a overconfidence where I don't question myself anymore. And part of self-awareness is the ability to actually question your own assumptions and say, wait a second, is this really correct? Are my beliefs actually right? Are they based in evidence? Or do I just believe it because somebody told me, or because the church told me, or somebody? So the ability to examine your own irrationality and to examine your emotions and to examine your thoughts and your assumptions, that's part of self-awareness. I'll give you a very simple example, okay? If everybody on the call could, for a moment, think about if I'm watching TV and I have a remote control for the TV, right? When the battery runs low, do you press the remote harder? And I have to admit that, yes, when my battery is running low on my remote, I press the remote harder, even though I know that it makes no difference whatsoever. So this is an example of, a very simple example of irrationality. And according to brain scientists, 85% of our behavior is irrational, 15% is rational. This explains why wars break out, why people buy the wrong stocks, why people make bad hiring decisions, why people come up with weird strategies that don't actually help them at all or don't help anybody. Okay, so unless we check ourselves, we're going to run into the wrong direction, even if we take very decisive action.
I'm just telling you, if you just join us, my name is Roosevelt, and you are following the Leaders Book Club. And today, our guest, Dr. Thomas D. ZWEIFEL, who is an outstanding professor, adjunct professor at Columbia University, and as well is the author of several books, including Leadership in 100 Days. And when we started, Thomas asked us, hey, who is your best leader and who is your worst? And some of our friends mentioned Lincoln and Mother Teresa. And I talked about my father, and Thomas spoke about Winston Churchill. Now it's time for you to pick your own and to share with us. And as well, we talked about the uncertain time that we are living, and that in time like this, there's a call for leadership because we are living in a vulnerable moment, uncertainty in time, and as well things are we are living with ambiguity because there's cloud we cannot see. And
Exactly.
Thomas came with a hierarchy of actions, and level one is how can you, and here it is, this is the global leader. Now we are at level one, self-assessment, and we are making a difference between self-awareness and self-confidence and so forth. So Thomas Weischwer, today we're talking about one of his books, Leadership in 100 Days. Thomas?
Yes. So thank you, Roosevelt. That's a great summary. And I'm going to go to the second level. Once you've built your self-awareness, which also includes regulating your emotions, for example, not just to freak out and go into a panic and fire everybody because you're so afraid that your company needs to cut costs or is going under. To not be in survival, basically, to be building something rather than being in survival. I think that's the bottom line of self-awareness. The second level is relationship, where I speak and listen and I build trust and I build kind of shared interests and shared values, really, with other people, right? Because why should I do business with people, or why should I lead with other people who don't share my values? That would be kind of strange. Okay, so and I would also say that in this time of Corona, this is even more difficult and more important, because you and I, even on this call, we're communicating via Zoom, we're communicating via Skype, we're on WhatsApp. We're in a quarantine, so we cannot actually meet people face to face. So to understand how other people are doing or what they want is much more difficult. A British playwright comes to mind, George Bernard Shaw, in the last century, or in the century before the last century, who said the greatest problem about communication is the illusion that it has been accomplished.
If you can
the
repeat
greatest
that
problem
quote.
of communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
So sometimes you think because you say something, you think that everybody listen and understand it, and it might not be so.
Exactly. One of the things that I've learned that only 7% of the communication are the words, right? 93% are body language, mimics, tone of voice, and context. Like, in which context am I actually speaking to you? And unless you create the frame, and unless you and I can see each other and touch each other, we might misinterpret each other completely. So the second level in the book is about relationship. How do I build trust? And especially in this time of not being able to meet with each other, how can I build trust online? How can I build trust in a Zoom meeting, etc.? And my simple answer for now, and obviously in the book, there's a lot more tools than this, but a simple answer is, how do you build trust? Number one, you make commitments to people, and number two, you keep commitments. That's, in a way, the simplest way to build trust.
So
but
what I get from what
that
you said, we are moving from self-awareness, understanding yourself, and the second step is more about now we move up to relationship, while there is another step. But relationship is that you start with building trust by keeping your promises, by keeping your commitment, by walking the talk. It is not only that
Exactly.
I say something, it is more valuable that I follow with my commitment as well.
That's exactly right. Uh, and you know, I would assert that in this time of crisis, given the lockdown, it's even more difficult and more important to be empathetic, right? So to have empathy for other people. So, for example, when I get on a Zoom call, or I have lots of meetings right now that are either on WhatsApp or Skype, etc. I've been in my home office for the last 8 weeks, actually, because Switzerland is quite affected by the Corona crisis. We have basically the same number of dead per million as the United States. So it's pretty bad here. Fortunately, a lot of people are also okay. But I've been in lockdown, and how can I be empathetic? For example, if I picture the people that I'm going to be speaking to before I get on the phone, and I say, okay, I'm going to get on the phone with Roosevelt. What are his concerns? What do I know about him? What could be his agenda? What would he want? And then I will come up with some intended outcomes of the call, or some agenda for the call, or the purpose of the call that I want to make happen with him together, with you together, right? So by standing in Roosevelt's shoes ahead of time, I can be more empathetic and actually make a bigger impact in the relationship.
And that is what we call empathy. That means you can put yourself in someone else's situation. At least, as one of the empathic leader we heard in the world, he said, I feel your pain. And this leader is Bill Clinton. When he goes to meet someone in the community, and that could be a loss, that could be someone grieving from a parent. And today, really, and I really like the way you started our Zoom conversation. You took the time to pay tribute to those who are suffering. And that is empathy at its core, because you can put yourself in the body, you feel it.
Yeah.
And that person now, since you can be open to himself, now he can open to you and listening your message. That means you do not
Exactly.
come from entertainment, where you come from the top down, but now you say, I could be in that situation. I am opening to really understand where you are and what you do. That's a very good point. Trust, empathy. If you are taking notes, those are the concepts that maybe from this book club that you go and you dig, you dig more about those concepts. How to develop my trust capacity, how to
Exactly.
develop my empathy capacity in that moment and beyond.
And it's great that you mentioned Bill Clinton. I had the great privilege in 1994 to actually meet Bill Clinton. And I have to tell you, I was in the same meeting. I was also meeting Nelson Mandela, by the way. And I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever in my life felt so listened to. And I'm not saying I agree with Bill Clinton on other things that he's done in his life. And I don't even think I need to say what that was. But his capacity to listen and to make you feel like there's nobody else in the world, and he is absolutely with you, really is a role model for me.
100%. When he's listening to you, his eye contact goes directly to your eye. Even if someone is pulling his costume right there, he is with you. And also that gives you that moment, because you do not have 24 hours with him. You just had 1 or 2 minutes. He gives you that undivided attention, that you put you in a position of self-confidence, that I am being heard. Because today people need to have that feeling. Because what is leadership? at the end, this is a transfer of feeling. You want to influence people. But for
Yes.
those people to really follow you, they need to understand that you understand them. Is that so?
Yeah. Absolutely. And they need to feel that your interests are compatible, right? That you really understand where they're coming from, rather than just pushing your agenda. You know, I think we've all been there, that if somebody tries to sell you something, if they're just broadcasting about how great the product is, you don't need to know that. I can watch a video about it. I can think for myself. But if somebody asks me questions and they're really interested in me, they don't want to just sell me a share in a company or sell me some product, but they're actually asking me, where do you want to go? What are your interests? What do you want in life? Who are you? Who's your family? Do you have kids? Whatever, right? That builds the trust also and the credibility.
And what I get
Makes
from
me,
what you said, Thomas, the best way to build that trust, instead of selling benefits, features and benefits, start by telling your story. And when your story matches your prospects or your consumer story, now our path cross. And somebody defines leadership as pathways. That means we have an opportunity where our path cross. Since our path cross, now we can go together and we can build something together. And
exactly.
if you see leadership is as flexible as it is, there is not one specific trait, there is not specific character, there is not one specific personality. This is your ability. This is the whole. It is not about what I will say, the one element trait. This is the whole. And your ability to be a leader is to take into account all those elements and make them your whole.
Yes, exactly. And that gets me to the next level, the vision level, actually. At the vision level, now that I've built the self-awareness, I'm clear about who I am, I'm clear about my assumptions, I'm not just self-confident, although that helps as well sometimes, but also self-aware, right? I've built the relationship, I've built the trust. People now find me credible. They find me somebody that shares their interests, that has their life in mind, yeah? That I'm somebody who supports them, who takes care of them. So I've built that relationship. Now I can go to the third level, which is the vision level. And at the vision level, again, I'm asking a simple question. Where do you want to go, or what do you want? That's the simple question. And again, the book has tools of how you do that. You know, how do you build a vision that is shared? But it's the basic idea is to ask somebody, what do you want? Or, you know, like I would ask my daughter, what do you want to be when you grow up? That immediately gets her into a vision conversation. And by the way, all of these levels in this pyramid are not things, they're conversations, right? So I'm having a conversation about myself called why. Why am I getting impatient? Or why am I sad? Or why am I depressed? Or why did I just get angry? Or why is this important to me? That's the self-awareness. At the relationship level, I'm asking who am I and who are you and who are we together? At the vision level, I'm asking what? And I'm gonna give you one tool here at the vision level, and you could do this after the call if you want, to actually write down an article about yourself in 5 years from today, okay? So you would take a newspaper of your choice, whatever your favorite newspaper is. I'm gonna take The Economist or the New York Times or whatever it is, and an article appears about you and your leadership in that newspaper in 5 years from today. And somebody else is writing the article. So you're gonna write about yourself in the third person, and you say, what did this leader accomplish? What value did they add to other people? What difference did they make? What was unique about their strategy? What did people say about this person? You know, what did VIPs say? Like Bill Clinton or the president of Haiti or the president of the United States or whoever. And finally, how do they spend a typical day in their life? And to literally write down a very concrete, very specific article about yourself 5 years from now. And you will see that if you write this down specifically, that this language starts reaching into the present and actually shaping your decisions and shaping how you live life.
Wow, that is amazing to project yourself in the future. And also you are the best one who can write about yourself, and you have an opportunity to design. That's another word. Design your own architecture, your own building, your own you towards the future, and based on the foundation that has been laid down. We're talking about knowing yourself, and as even Socrates in his time,
Yeah.
it was, hey, know thyself.
Yes.
It is very difficult to know yourself. If it is difficult for you to know yourself, how dare you to know others?
Yes,
So that's
exactly.
you have a mission. You are yourself a project for yourself. So that's why you need to be humble, and humility starts exactly when you know that you don't know, when you know that there are more
Mhm.
things that you don't know than things that you pretend to know, because
Mhm.
a lot of things that you know aren't so. And
Exactly.
and
That's exactly
also
right.
and also when you ask yourself those questions, you start with why, as Simon Sinek said, and you mentioned, you start with why I am, why I feel that thing in my stomach right now, why my fingers are like that, why I'm tense, why I'm anxious,
Mhm.
why, who
Mhm.
should I be, what
Mhm.
should I do? And now when you ask those questions, you need to listen. You listen to your voice, and that's why you cannot be acting all the time, because this is in doing nothing that those answers will be back to you. The very same way when Archimedes was lying is in bath, and then he discovered that principle that today we talk about when we drop something in water. This is, you discover things when you do nothing. That does not
Yes,
mean when you just sit, you are reflecting, you're not doing anything. That means
exactly.
now you give yourself an opportunity for your soul to catch with your body, for your
Exactly.
thinking to catch with your action. And that's what I get from what you said. What I will be doing in the next 5 years will be based on the thinking that I'm having now, with that conversation that I'm having right now. And the next level, Thomas?
Exactly. And by the way, you cannot do nothing. You can do nothing. So in other words,
Mm,
even when you do nothing, you're doing nothing.
mm,
Uh,
I
but
like that.
let me go to the next level. I just want to say also that in this crisis, I think the temptation to go back to the past and to not build the future, but to be reactive is very, very great.
Why
Okay,
you
and I
say
don't
that?
blame anybody. It's you know, we all go back into our fears, and we go into past patterns and past behaviors that used to work. Okay, we got to clamp down. We got to do what we knew to do 10 years ago. But that would be a disaster, because in this crisis, you're going to need to develop new business models, totally new ways of reaching your customers, new ways of leading. I would really not go back to the past. I think
So
there will
what I
be a
get
new
from what you
normal.
said is that I cannot go back to 1930 on when the Great Depression. I can only refer to know the patterns and the trends that were then. But now I am designing a new future, and I need to have to look forward and not understanding that, oh, I will be back to what it was, because it will never be so.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And I think also based on what we said about relationship, if you are empathetic to your customers, you will find at the vision level very new ways of serving those customers and serving other people that may not have occurred to you before you did that, okay? I
Amazing.
think that's where innovation starts, right? When you're not just doing what you always did, but you actually look at what do people need right now? How could you make a contribution to them? How could you help them, or how could you add value to them?
And you
And
are so
that's
right. Yesterday, I blogged on my blog, Roosevelt.com, because I was listening self. When you focus too much on self, and we define self as that single element leadership failure,
yeah,
single element leadership failure, because most we're talking about self-image, self-deception, self pity, selfishness, because there is no fish in
mhm,
it. But at the end of the day, instead of thinking too much about self, think about others and take service. If I can serve you, how can I serve you? And now when I get into a room, I don't need to, hey, how do they think about me? And then I don't know. Now instead of how can I serve the next person? And this is the question, how may I help you? And this is by being empathic and by listening to you, I can do that as well. So
exactly.
now,
And that gets me to the strategy level, okay?
mhm.
Because you just asked the critical question for strategy, and it's here. I hope you can see this.
Yes, I can say it. Yes.
Uh, so it's the second highest level. And at this level, I'm asking how. Okay. So again, first level, I asked why. Second level, who. Third level, what. And now the strategy level, I'm asking how can we do this? And how can we serve customers? How can we innovate? How can we make this happen? This vision that we want to create, that we want to build. And at the strategy level, I'm becoming uh, pathway oriented, and I look at, okay, great, I got this great vision for the future, but how can I now plan it backwards to the present? And I call this a reverse roadmap. So I actually think backwards. I don't think from the circumstances towards the future. I think from the future, from the vision, from the 5 years, for example, or even from the end of my life, if I'm an individual. I think backwards in a reverse roadmap. I say, okay, great. 5 years from today, I'm going to be this, and my company will be this. 4 years from today, 3 years from today, 2 years from today, and then I know what I need to do differently in the next few months or in the next year. Right now, I can't hear you anymore. 1 second. Roosevelt, I cannot hear you right now.
Okay, I said you
Oh, now.
start with the end in mind, like
That's
Stephen Covey
correct.
will put it. Yes.
That's
And
correct.
and the last one is action.
The last one is action. That's correct. Um, and in action, I would say the crisis teaches us. I'm always looking at what does this crisis tell me, because whatever I can appreciate gives me power in
Mm.
life. And I found a way to actually appreciate that this crisis gives us such a tremendous opportunity to think newly and to take new actions. And so I want to just share one tool from the book, which is, I call it breakdown to breakthrough. And it's obviously in the book, there's a lot of other action tools, but how to be effective in action. And this brings us back to Churchill again. You take a breakdown. So you basically say, okay, I cannot do the things that I'm normally doing. Okay, so there's a breakdown. For example, my consulting is reducing. I cannot meet people right now, so I cannot give keynotes. Okay, so that would be the breakdown. And then I look at the future again and say, okay, what's my commitment in the background? Because no breakdown exists without a commitment in the background. And then I can look at new options for the future and then cause a breakthrough. So I'll give you one example from a company's life. It's a kind of a funny example. Pfizer Corporation, I think everybody knows Pfizer. In the US, they created this cardiovascular drug. and they tested the drug on men and women in the lab. And the men had big side effect. Okay, I think you know what I'm talking about. So then the company said, oh, sorry, that's a malfunction. We should take this back to the lab. We need to come up with a better drug that doesn't have the side effects. But then the marketing people came and said, wait a second, this could be a great lifestyle drug. And we're going to write on the bottle, this could produce unwelcome side effects. And what did it become? It became Viagra, which became the third most best-selling drug in the history of pharmaceuticals. Right? Sorry?
This is serendipity.
It's serendipity, but there is a system behind it. And the system for me is breakdown to break. In other words, I can take something that looks like a failure, that looks like an obstacle, it looks like some kind of a barrier, but I can, if I look at my commitment in the background, because Pfizer's commitment was not to produce a great cardiovascular drug. Their senior commitment was to produce a blockbuster drug, to produce a best-selling drug. So they turned the breakdown into a breakthrough.
And this is exactly what leadership is about. And I hope that next week we will take that foundation that we have built today. Now we have the definition of leadership. We know those 5 levels that we need. Now, how can we adapt what we learn to the reality of today? And that will be our next conversation. And next Friday at the same time, 5 p.m. in Eastern, in European time, and 11 a.m. right here in Eastern Standard Time. My guest today, Thomas ZWEIFEL, is the author of several books, including Leadership in 100 Days, Communicate or Die, Culture Clash, and of course we want to not only to talk about those 500 top companies, but also leaders like yourself at Main Street, because it's also great. Yes, we have Wall Street companies, those Pfizers, but also leadership is from Main Street, from people like yourself who build from nothing to something. And thank you, Thomas, for your time, and I hope that we can catch up next week.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, everybody, for your listening. I know it takes a lot to listen to all this jam-packed webinar. 1 hour, amazing facilitation, Roosevelt, really well done. I just want to say that all of these levels are conversations. So you and I have the power, because we have the mouth, we have a mouth and we have ears. We have the power to have these conversations that can change lives. And that's why you and I have the power to be leaders. No matter how much money you have, no matter what title you have the power to lead. And with that, I want to invite you also to share about this conversation, invite other people into this conversation, join with me on LinkedIn or Facebook, so that next week we can have an even bigger conversation